Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. I'm Doug. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Doug.
Wow. Today, another show. I think it's kind of like whack-a-mole. Every time they put up someone new for some big political position, you and the miners come in and whack that mole. And then they disappear. Matter of fact, think of what was his name? He's so far out of the news now. He was Obama's choice to be president. And basically, Obama wasn't going to give us a chance. What's his name? Deval Patrick.
Oh, yeah.
And then you and the miners did a revelation, an expose on him. He disappeared. Okay. Susan Rice, when we did the expo on her, both Aim for Truth and for Americans and Invasion, she disappeared. Now she's raising her nasty, ugly little mole head up again, and someone needs to whack it. But now we can see that Biden is not going to make it to the end of his term, or he certainly will not be running for president in 2024. We know that Gavin Newsom is out there doing it.
Before you get on that subject, I think that the point you're making is that we have ethics laws for a reason. And those laws for a reason are that a public official has a duty to disclose their background that might be relevant to their ability to perform their job. And so all we're doing is doing what every elected official and certainly members of the press should do in investigating the background of somebody who's going to hold public office. And so while it's shocking to see how it's not just lazy, we see a criminal ignorance among our free press, the supposed keeper of openness and transparency. We see them totally failing. And so just the very act of our miners doing what should be a normal activity when you're evaluating a public official, we see is not being done across the board and around the world.
Absolutely. The politicians aren't being vetted. Once they get selected, not elected, then they stay there. And the worse they are, the longer they stay. Go figure. How could anyone in California be supporting Adam Schiff? I don't care if you're a crazy, wild, leftist, insane Democrat. How could you support the idiocy that we see in politics? It's because they are not elected. And we've busted that so many times, and no one has come close to it. And we don't see any hope. I don't see any hope for 2024 because they haven't gone to paper ballots. They can't count them. These are all electronic, digital, manipulated tallies that are basically a selection.
I heard the other day that one California county has gone back to paper ballots. They've thrown out their Dominion voting machines and they're going back to paper.
Well,
there's a start.
Since we're talking about good old Newsom, or gruesome Newsom, as they like to call him, or I like to call him Gavin Nuisance, because why? He's a communist. Everything he does might as well come from the Communist Chinese Central Committee. He has recently, well, let's say since he's been in office, he spent $17.5 billion giving it away to the invaders across the southern border who he has invited to come into California, provided them with free medical care. I don't get free medical care. I have to pay. Nobody who's a citizen gets anything like he gives to illegal, they call them migrants. They're not migrants, and they're not the people coming in to do work. They are, in fact, recently, he just did what he's done at least 3 times since I've known, since he's been the governor. He brings in the fire department and the police. He goes to LA, or he goes to San Francisco. Recently it was LA. 75,000 homeless people have fire hoses turned on their tents and every possession they own. They are then swept away. They're put on buses and no one sees them again. He is a murderer.
The Soviet Union used to do that regularly.
It's you see these things happening. For instance, all the states got a bunch of money for some federal program recently, and they were supposed to pay it back over a few years. Gavin's come out. He says, no, I'm not paying any of it back. I forget how many billions of dollars he is defaulting on a federal loan. Nothing's happening. How about him allowing illegal immigrants, undocumented invaders in our country, to vote? And California. California wants to secede from the Union. I say let them go, but let's make sure that we break them off, at a nice fault and let California go out into the ocean because they
Hey,
are
Ron,
a pariah.
I've got a lot of friends out in California. We don't want that to happen.
Oh, they all need to move out. Let's remember over 47% of Californians now state that if they could, they would move out of California because of the horrible conditions that Gavin Newsom has created. But let's remember, Gavin Newsom was just like Jerry Brown. Every socialist, fascist, communist idea that comes up, he supports. And he is also in the pocket of the same people who supported Jerry Brown, J.P. Getty. And you're going to tell us about that today. So, in your revelation about Gavin Newsom, what can you tell us about the fact that he is not an American and he is not serving we the people?
We discovered that the overarching influence in his life is the J. Paul Getty Foundation Trust, because his father was the chief attorney essentially for J. Paul Getty during the Getty oil days and then in the Getty Trust days. We discover that Getty's father did not like all of J. Paul Getty's philandering and therefore never really gave up the reins of the entire Getty oil empire and instead gave it to William Newsom III, Gavin's father, to manage for the family and for the company. So we're talking about a major player sitting behind the Getty curtain who is really running things and had been for many decades. And as we were looking at J. Paul Getty, his boss, we discovered one thing that I'm sure would be lost on anyone else who read it, and that was that J. Paul Getty owned Sutton Place in London. And Sutton Place is something now known to our researchers because it was the location of the opening meeting of the first Imperial Press Conference in 1909. And it was such a prominent meeting that they have a picture of the event and a discussion of the event in their official record, which has been censored for the last 100 years. And it was then the home of Lord Northcliffe, who was at that time the owner of the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the London Times, and he was a kingpin in the British newspaper business with W.T. Stead and a number of other players. And he was essentially a founder, but he's called a co-founder of the Empire Press Union, which essentially, when you say Reuters and you say Associated Press, you might as well say the Empire Press Union and the British shills who have fanned out all over the world to make sure that the messages of the English-speaking British Empire are what is read on every chyron throughout the world. So that was for starters, Douglas, that's who Newsom, what the environment that Newsom was raised into. Plus, after he went to a very unremarkable college, he then went on to found about 10 or 15 businesses. Now you'd think, wow, that's pretty impressive to found that many businesses. And what we found was all but one of those was funded with Getty money. So obviously he was placed in those companies, and he obviously sensitive about it because he says, no, I really worked hard for those companies and I really got them off the ground, and they were all successful because of my business prowess. Now he studied political science at college, by the way. So he started all these companies, and then magically he becomes on the board of commissioners in San Francisco. Then he becomes the mayor of San Francisco, and now he's the governor of California. I haven't seen a much better example of a vacuous clone or groom than we see in Gavin Newsom.
Sutton House Norcliffe, you might as well call that a lair of propaganda demons. Wellington House. When I think Sutton Place, I think Wellington House. I think
Correct.
Tavistock. I think propaganda. And basically, remember, these are the propaganda ministers who foment war. They create the false flags that create wars for economic gain. Okay, so we are talking about pure evil here, and that his family was directly connected to all of that.
Correct. Can I add a couple more things about Sutton Place? So we looked at the history of Sutton Place, and when you know, it's actually listed in the Book of Domes, yeah, from 1070. I hear Tyler in the background.
She's closing the door so the noise doesn't get to us.
Okay. It was listed in the Book of Domes, and therefore was one of the early properties of the William the Conqueror that was managed by the Radnites, the Babylonian Radnites. So we're talking about something that clearly is a demon lair. It can't be anything else. And it has been passed down through the ages. And it was, as we said, Lord Northcliffe's house. He just rented it, by the way. Then in, I think it was 59, J. Paul Getty bought it, and that he made that what he called the office of his Eastern corporate empire. And that would have been where Newsom's father cut his teeth on managing the Getty Empire from the UK, not from San Francisco. And then we now see in 2008, it was purchased by Alisher Usmanov, he's a Russian oligarch who clearly is carrying forward the tradition of this demonic place. So I think in doing that, we see not only the demonism coming out of Sutton Place, but its offspring, which is the First Imperial Press Conference, the Empire Press Union, which then a month later saw the formation of MI6, MI5, and GCCS, which is now GCHQ, which were all outgrowths of this newspaper conference where about 650 delegates from all over the world came to London to be schooled in the new way that the British Empire was going to be run, and the centrality of the bankers in using propaganda to carry out this strategy, which we are dealing with today. There you go. We've tied over 1,000 years of history.
And these are corporate warlords. I mean, these are people who aren't British. So when I say the British, please, I'm not insulting the British people. There's very few of them. There's only invaders in Britain, basically. There's very few Celts and Britons left. And in California, where they're giving reparations, but they never had slavery. Not a single slave in California, but reparations are going to be paid. And Gavin says he's not giving that money back to the government. He's going to take the money from taxpayers, pay out reparations, and basically turn California into a retreat for those people who are political activists who believe in fascism. Now, let's go back. The Empire Press Union is now called the Commonwealth Press
Union.
Okay, so it still goes on to this day. Nobody knows about it. No one can tell you a word about the number one propaganda machine in the world that created Strategic Communications Laboratory, created Cambridge Analytica, which has interfered in our elections, created the chance for Mark Malloch Brown to say that he has manipulated elections in 17 countries, America particularly. So these aren't elected officials. Let's remember this. These are not elected officials, and they are crown agents. And Gavin Newsom could not be any more of a crown agent. Let's just look at the fact that his dad was in oil. And at the same time that Rockefeller had a 100% monopoly, agreed with the government, Getty became the richest man in the world. Not possible without the help of Rockefeller. In other words, he's a Rockefeller agent. And who's Rockefeller? He's a British crown agent. So we are talking about that California has been ruled by the Browns, the Pelosi's, the Newsoms, and the Gettys for decades now. And that what we see there is the worst government criminal activity in human history. And now they want to run, they haven't said they're going to run Gavin for president, But anyone with a brain knows that he's out there doing more things on the trail for Biden than Biden is doing.
I gave you enough fodder, but I'm not done giving you fodder for your diatribes, your
For my
rants.
rant.
Yes. Uh, on his mother's side, now we were talking Newsom on his father's side, and Newsom is a long line of British uh, a long line in his British family on the Newsom side. On the mother's side, Tess, her maiden name is Menzies. And if you look at the records of the clan Menzies, it's a Scottish clan, Roman Catholic largely. And there is a very famous Menzies that is in contemporary memory, and that is Sir Stuart Graham Menzies, who was the original chief of MI6 and who ran British intelligence up through World War II. And we first encountered Menzies at the formation of what is now become called Five Eyes. But at the end of World War II, it was a super secret set of meetings between American and British intelligence where the future of intelligence in the world was going to be managed. And so, what we see out of this agenda now is that the end of the war was an opportunity to reorganize intelligence. And on May 5th, or March 5th of 1946, there was a super secret agreement made where America and Britain would share essentially all intelligence. That agreement was not released until 2010 by both MI6 and NSA, and that's when we saw a copy of it about 5 years later. But this was a scandalous, treasonous agreement whereby all of the intelligence that we gather in the United States is shared immediately with our special relationship partners in England, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And in the very first inaugural meeting after the March 5th agreement, the chairman of that meeting was none other than Sir Stuart G. Menzies, head of MI6. So there we saw the complete give up of American sovereignty through the intelligence world. And those people then started marching forward to set up America's post war intelligence groups in NSA and CIA. So from the beginning of our intelligence post war, we did not control anything about our country. They knew everything in Britain. And so obviously, when you know everything about another country, you're going to use that judiciously to make sure that your people get put in place that, and so that's what we've seen politically. The latest being our discussion of Newsom. You put your minions in place that in Newsom's case, I'm sorry to say, we tried to find something that we could find that was good about his background, but he is one of the most vacuous individuals I think we've studied. And he has nothing to show for his position. He certainly didn't earn it. He's a placeholder. He's as bad as the prop up at Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. And so they just read from scripts and they take orders from the British Pilgrim Society. And that was the other thing about Menzies. Menzies was the original MI6 chief after it was formed, coming out of the Imperial Press Union and the Imperial Press Conference in 1909. So there we have the most notorious British spy, probably responsible for the death of tens of millions of individuals, setting up America's post-war intelligence world, and nobody says a darn thing. And now we see that name popping up in Gavin Newsom's background. So, and we see his father working for a notorious pilgrim, And one of the things that we learned, which is new information from this research, is that in 1912, President Warren G. Harding shoehorned J. Paul Getty into Oxford. 1912 was just before the formation of the Federal Reserve, by the way. And we see Harding, and we started looking at Harding's background, and when you know, he was assigned to be the first president of the English-speaking Union. Now, who's ever heard of that? Do you realize that the English-speaking Union today has over 65 offices in the US? And when we started digging into the Pilgrim Society records, we see a description of the English speaking union. They often had meetings together, and the Pilgrims described themselves as the elites. And the English speaking union was for the common man. And they were tied at the hip. And it was another one of these concentric circles of relationship that all roll up to the Pilgrim Society. So when we say deep state, we need to stop saying that, and we need to say Pilgrim Society, because as you've pointed out, until you actually call the demon out and get them to give their real name, they have power. But when you call them out and tell them to get behind you, they have no power. And that's what we've got to do. And I think that's why that demon has been so clever at making sure that the idea of pilgrims and Pilgrim Society is so wiped out of American psyche that we won't even say it. We're uncomfortable saying it. And hopefully that's changing.
To think that we come from the British is incorrect. No, we don't, because the British are German and their monarchy is Germany. And they are, in fact, not for the British people. And when you talk about whether it's the Commonwealth Press Union, which is the #1 propaganda machine in the world and has been throughout all the modern wars, they've created all the modern wars.
Right.
You're talking about the outer circle of the Pilgrim Society. The Pilgrim Society was created with an idea that there'd be an inner core, and then a small group around them, and then a larger group. Well, this is the larger group. And the larger group are basically, it's not just propaganda. This is
Right.
war economy.
It is.
And we've been in a war economy since the day the Pilgrims were founded, since before Cecil Rhodes had conquered South Africa, the Transvaal, and these plans were in place, and they were for English-speaking people. They were going to create an imperial empire for English. First, they said white people, and
Right.
talk about white supremacists.
They said white race.
White
More
race.
specifically.
And then it became English-speaking people because the Commonwealth became so huge from fleecing so many different nations, 54 nations, that they had to include English-speaking people. And as far as they're concerned, we never won the American Revolution. We are nothing more than the military branch of the Pilgrim Society, and we follow what the propagandists tell us to. MI6.
Can I stop you there? Because if I know that's hard for people to believe that we could have never won the war when all of the propaganda that we were raised with says we did. But I can give you one good example and that proves we never gained our sovereignty, in that even during the war, Alexander Hamilton, who we now know was British agent #7, was responsible directly for the formation of our first 4 banks. The Chase Manhattan, what is now Chase Manhattan, Wells Fargo, Citizens Bank, and HSBC, and its affiliate in the US, Bank of America, I believe. And all of these banks were funded with British money, mainly Rothschild, but also Barings and Schiffs and 2 or 3 other key families in England, Carter. So we never had control of our commerce. And as we now know, and the British have known, the Babylonian Radhanite bankers from ancient Babylon have known, if you control the money and you control the issuance of currency, you control that country. And as Rothschild once famously said, I don't care who they elect if I run the banks. So we've never had control of our banks since even during the revolution.
And why is it that the richest men in America, who literally JP Morgan loaned America money at one point, why is it that J. Paul Getty, considered to be the richest man in the world in
'59, I think it
in
was.
'59, yes, and then of course, he came to power with his dad just before and during the Second World War. Well, the Second World War, all oil by then was controlled by Rockefeller. So there was only one way that J.P. Getty, that the Getty family could have had made so much money in oil, and that is if Edwin Pauley, who basically was a crown agent, he was in charge of all supplies for all countries during the war and after the war. And he became so friggin' rich that he left America, went to Canada, and then he went back to Britain to receive his honors from the monarchy. Well, it would have taken Edwin Pauley to basically finger the Getty family to take some of the money away from the Rockefellers. There's no other way that that could have happened. And so what we're talking about is the Getty family was chosen to become filthy rich in America as a counter measure for Rockefeller, who wasn't, I think, falling into place quite as nicely as the Rothschilds would like to. Like JP Morgan was a Rothschild agent. All these people were Rothschild agents, these bankers. And so if J. Paul Getty and his fortune came from oil, then it came from Edwin Pauley, and Edwin Pauley was a British crown agent, one of the worst. And again, hardly ever mentioned. You can't find a historian who knows who Edwin Pauley is. You can't find a historian who knows what the Commonwealth Press Union is. You can't find a historian except for now, and that's because of your work and the work of the miners and our support of that, because there have been literally millions of hits on some of these videos that we've made where people are becoming aware of this, and you're becoming more popular. You're being invited onto more shows. I'm becoming more popular to go onto the radical shows because I love to rant and rave. But basically, people want to know the truth. They finally awakened. I believe the pandemic caused people to awaken. And they started to say, oh my goodness, if what I see is true, then everything I've been told by the media, by the propaganda, by selected officials, politicians in our government is all false. And every word out of Gavin Newsom's mouth is false. Let's remember, he right after Pelosi went down to Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Central America, and got all kinds of money, donations from those countries to give to Pelosi for her Democrats in the House. Guess who went 2 weeks later? Gavin Newsom. And what did he do? He took taxpayers' money from America, went down and started a multi-million-dollar program to supposedly keep people in those countries instead of coming to California. That is not what's happened. Those programs never even got started. He went down to receive his bearer bonds, just like Pelosi. That's how they always get paid, in bearer bonds. He went down to pick them up personally because he has diplomatic immunity. He can bring them back across the border without being searched. Same thing as John Roberts did when he went to Malta to supposedly teach a class to a small group of people in Malta, instead of teaching Harvard or Columbia or any of the other normal places that the evil ones teach and make tons of money for doing nothing. This is the same old program. Matter of fact, I know I am getting bored because it's too darn easy to predict what the research is going to tell us.
I know. That was the other thing about that. I was talking about that with Pete Santilli. That what we're now seeing is the method to their madness. And one of the first places we have to start in America is looking at their background and whether their ethics match their words. And that's all we look for. If you're doing what you're saying, you're great. We don't have any argument with that. Even if we disagree with you, if you're doing what you're saying. But in this case, everything these people say is a lie. And so they're inviting the demons into their lives. And then when other people act on their lies, those demons become powerful by this choice that people like Gavin Newsom make, to the point where everything they do becomes a lie, and they've invited the demon mammon into their lives and into California. And so the idea that we should be looking at their background uh, makes all the sense in the world. Uh, but if you're attempting to hide, then all the people who are sycophants are going to get mad at the people who are bringing this information forward, when in fact they need to be getting mad at the people that are lying to them. So isn't it amazing when we see that? We're seeing the level of brainwashing that's going on, where a lot of individuals, a lot of citizens would defend the wrongdoer for being outed.
Yeah. Well, Pelosi's from California, Schiff is from California, and the Newsom family. They have made deals where they bought up the land that then became 100 times worth more value after they bought it, because it then becomes a government project. Squaw Valley, the high-speed rail, all the fire destruction that has happened, and then the California laws that say you have to build back with green technology. Well, look at look at those families. Look at the politicians in California. They always own the land that then becomes the government project. And some of this land is mysteriously burnt up in ways that no one can explain. No one has explained the California fires where the house is burned up, but the trees next to them don't.
Well,
No one can,
as we discovered in the formation of the first bank, the London Assurance Company, who helped fund Hamilton's first bank, also insured all the ships around the world, almost all the ships. Lloyd's was the other one. And we see that how this scam works. If you need to raise some cash, you just send a ship out somewhere and make sure it never comes back. Then you get your insurance payout.
but we know the ship went to a secret port and unloaded all their goods,
Right.
and the ship continues to sail under a new name today. That's like the story of the Titanic. That's like the
Exactly.
story of the Lithuania. That's like all of the false flags. But let's just
Lusitania, is that what you meant?
Lusitania. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. You're here to correct me on that word, because I can't pronounce it no matter what. No matter if I printed it on my forehead, I couldn't
Lithuanian
say.
background.
Anyway, the ship that had all the weapons, and they said just had tourists on it, where it was sunk by the German U-boats, which supposedly drew us into the war. That is complete and absolute nonsense. It's another lie. But then again, you see, there's a thing with demons. It's called revelation of the method. If they tell you ahead of time they're going to do horrible things to you, then it's okay if they do them, because they said it out loud.
Yeah.
Well, look at Gavin Newsom. He, with his very best friend when he was the governor, when he was the mayor of San Francisco, he had an affair with his best friend's wife. And then that should have taken him down. In the old days, anybody do anything like that, then they say, oh, well, then you could be blackmailed. So then the communists and the Russians and the Chinese can come in and blackmail you. By the way, these people are communists, Chinese and Russians, okay? That's who our politicians are. They allowed China to come in and take over this country. Just before Trump was elected, they had control of everything. They bought the greatest properties we had. They were buying our land from our national parks, all the services, so on and so forth. It's basically our politicians are selling out Americans.
What was that reference you made to the demon needing to describe what they were going to do? Yeah, I've never heard you say
Revelation of
that
method.
phrase. Revelation of method. Okay.
Yeah.
And where does that come from?
It's just an old term for why it is that Machiavelli would tell people the evil he was about to do, and other people. So it's been used for a long, long time. So why is it that why was it then that Gavin Newsom came out, and what did he do? The second that the press started saying we need to get rid of the mayor of San Francisco because he had an affair, he's now compromised, he comes out and says, no, it's all true. It's all true. And I'd like to apologize. That's it. And then he continued as the mayor. Okay, this is what Hunter Biden. Everyone should know Hunter Biden will never be prosecuted, of course, because the DOJ is corrupt, the FBI is even more corrupt, and the CIA is ultra corrupt, and it's a British agent.
Before we get off of what you said that Gavin said about his affair, in his one book that he wrote, he didn't write it, is a co-writer. He does say in there that he believes in the death of privacy for the technical world. And one of the things he said that gives him the ability to do is get ahead of the narrative. And so what you just described was him implementing his own strategy in that he says, well, I'm just going to admit it right out of the chute. Therefore, I take all the wind out of the sails of anybody who would criticize me for that. Hey, he still had the affair. He still didn't disclose it. How many ethics rules did he violate, and how many people were damaged in California by him engaging in that activity? I'm sorry is not enough. Come on. When are we going to wake up and realize I'm sorry means nothing to these demons?
Kamala Harris, another Californian, another person who climbed the ladder of political success through sex. Doug Imhoff, her British handler. She was supposed to become the president, but she's too much of an idiot. Every time she speaks, they have to tell her, don't speak again ever. Because why? She was selected and she was corrupt. And because you're corrupt, you could be manipulated by the corrupting ones, by the
Yes.
Pilgrim Society, by the Crown, by the agents, by Serco getting all the contracts in America, by especially the patent office, controlling the patent office, by SES controlling basically the shadow government. We aren't in America, folks. There is no America. We do not have free elections. We do
By the
not have a
way,
border.
yesterday, Pete Santilli showed me a congressional record, a House record of the preparation for the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And in there, he showed proof that Serco is involved with Obamacare. Did you know that?
Well, the Sibelius, who he chose to spend a fortune to create the site and it was never created correctly, is a Canadian, for heaven's sakes.
That
Yes.
they're in there. CGI Federal is in there, and that's Michelle Obama's classmate. But in that same set of records was Serco. We're getting copies of all their certifications now. But and by the way, um, uh, the governor of Florida was on that committee, so he was aware of Serco. We were complaining that he didn't complain about the Serco's takeover the patent office. Little did we know Serco was also working to take over our healthcare system.
Which they did, by the way, and still do. Matter of fact, Obama is behind scenes changing those rules to give less service to the people who have been forced to go into those medical insurance situations. So it's anyone who thinks that for a moment America is what the propaganda says we are, the land of the free and the home of the brave. No, we're not. Most of our leaders are British agents.
Yeah.
For instance, we have been busting anybody who comes forward who wants to run for political office. For instance, Glenn Youngkin of Virginia. This man is a spy for the English, for the
Yeah.
British.
Oh, absolutely. He took an oath of allegiance in his formation of Kinetic. Now that's spelled Quinetiq, but it's pronounced Kinetic. And in 1908, let's see, it was in 2002, he created this, what is now a behemoth company with Carlyle Fund money, and took it to England and actually was the first director. And after that, Admiral Giambastiani, who was the chief of staff of he was the, what was his title? Deputy Chief of Staff for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And George Tenet, the former CIA director, were also directors in Kinetic, and they all took this oath to follow the crown in that company. And they're getting $8-10 billion contracts with the U.S. government. Serco, and between Serco and Kinetic, they have something like 16 to 20 billion dollars of contracts. Serco even manages FEMA Region 2 and 9 and about 56 of our airport air traffic controllers. We are hosed, Douglas.
We are so British. We are just British subjects, and we don't even know it. And we have no rights because we are unacknowledged British subjects of the Commonwealth. And so we don't get any benefit from the British. They create all the wars for us. We go and fight them. The Ukraine is a false flag. Please remember that I have told everyone from day one, when the British commandos went into Russia and blew up the power plant that ran the pipeline through Belarus and through Ukraine, two through Ukraine, one through Belarus, that started the war. That's when Putin went to war. It was a British attack. And it's always a British attack. And when it comes down to it, the British are nothing more. Their monarchy is nothing more than pathetic warlords that are a lineage of murderers. That's who they are.
Who have gotten their former colony to do all their heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
Let me just read to you a list that is going to be published here. If people are having a hard time believing that America is so compromised, let me read you all the organizations that are operating in the U.S. that are proven to be British controlled. Pilgrim Society, English Speaking Union, Boston Brahmins, Crown Agents, Senior Executive Service, that's 10,000 federal employees, Rhodes Scholarships, Schwartzman Scholarships, Anti-Defamation League, Reuters, Associated Press, Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, New York Times, Council on Foreign Relations, Intercontinental Exchange, that's ICE, World Economic Forum, United Nations, Royal Overseas League, Princess Trust International, Annual International Achievement Summit, Serco, Kinetic, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, CIA, FBI, NSA, Incutel, U.S. Navy, and U.S. Space Force. And this is not a full list. So they have so thoroughly infiltrated our institutions, and because they control the media, we don't even know it.
And they control the media through ISIS management. ISIS is another name for the Thames River, right, which goes through by London. So what you're dealing with here is ISIS management is controlled by, in America, by Dianne Feinstein,
right,
and her husband. So basically, every speck of news that you get, including Fox News, is filtered through the BBC, and the BBC is nothing more than a continuation of Wellington House, which is nothing more than war propaganda. We are still at war.
That's the first British propaganda bureau.
Exactly.
That was formed by Churchill's nephew.
Yep. So that's who determines who's going to be selected in America, and then the mainstream media supports it. As a matter of fact, you can see this now. Joe Biden couldn't do anything wrong. They lied. You watched the polls drop, and then they jump back up for no reason whatsoever. And then they drop. They'd go down into the teens and the 20s, and then they'd come back up into the 40s. All lies. And so they try to manipulate us with polls that come directly from the BBC. What's the name of the place where the demon lair is? Bush.
Shepherd's Bush in West London.
Shepherd's Bush is literally the gates of hell being opened and coming up into the city of London and they control the world. It used to be the Vatican and a little bit Washington, D.C. No, except that the Pope keeps telling people to, invade other countries illegally and get killed. Think of it. The Pope is responsible for all of the people who die on our southern border because he told them all to come here and to invade our country, and that's the moral thing to do, and that all Christians need to wash their feet, as he washed their feet. Didn't let them stay in Vatican, but he washed their feet.
One of the things that struck me as we look at this power center that exists and why they're trying to destroy America, we have seen that they were pretty much fully in charge at the turn of the last century. Roosevelt, Churchill, you name it, across the board. They had control of our radio, our TV. Why didn't they take over fully then? And I think that the reason is that the Christian world kept telling the demon to get behind him. And that was a problem. They had to get rid of this idea within Christianity that God gave us the power to tell the devil to leave. And so by so clouding all the activities that we're seeing in fog so that we don't know which way is up, this demon has protected himself up till now. And when you say that there's a demon lair coming out of the city of London, I believe you. I think it's also a lair coming out of Washington, D.C., and another one coming out of Vatican City. And so and all of these point back to the Babylonian Radonites, who were pagans, who worshipped Moloch, who sacrificed children, who put people into slavery of all races, not just black, brown, white, yellow, all of those, all the races of the world have been enslaved by somebody else in the past. And it's all been financed by the people that run the finance and accounting and the currency issuing mechanisms, which are Babylonian Radonites, who have been hiding very well throughout these millennia. And we're having trouble talking about this because nobody's ever talked about this history. So we're finding words, we're finding vocabularies, we're finding analogies. It reminds me of developing when we first started inventing social media. We weren't working on something that anybody else had, so we had to develop a whole vocabulary on how to talk about what we were finding, and that ended up being a vocabulary now in social networking that everybody's familiar with. We created those words for that technology. And it was a very conscious effort on our part. And now I see us doing the same thing. So I think that your contribution to this has been your deep experience at exorcism and the nature of these demonic beings. On the flip side of that, the nature of the angels that are protecting us. And I'd like you to comment, if you would, for a few minutes on when these demons are trying to do what they're doing and we're telling them to get behind us, what are the angels doing at that same time?
Rejoicing. Your guardian angel stands behind you. So when you put the devil behind you and the guardian angel, then the guardian angel protects you. And essentially, it's I can smell a demon sulfur smell the second I see someone on the street.
Is truly sulfur smell?
Yeah, it smells like human burning flesh and it smells like sulfur. That's the reason they say Hillary Clinton stinks like cooked cabbage. She stinks like sulfur. Why? Because she's a demon. And all these people who are demons, if they have consciously done it, that's one thing. If they've unconsciously done it, that's something else. For instance, here's the unconscious complicit agreement with the devil that every single person on the face of the earth has made, though they don't know it. If you have ever once said that the United Nations has done anything good, you were praising the devil. You were worshiping the devil. The British created the League of Nations when they couldn't get America to join. Then they created the Institute for Pacific Relations to try to start a new group, and that then became the United Nations. And now the United Nations controls the world through the World Health Organization, the evilest group of people on the face of the earth, because they are murdering. They murdered 26 million people that we know of outright from the last pandemic. And they now, as soon as the vote is taken, and Biden has already sent his people to vote for the International Congress for the World Health Organization, to give complete and absolute control to the United Nations World Health Organization. One man, Tedros, controls the world at this point, period. And what is he? He's a communist, an open communist, supporting China and supporting the British. Now, the British try to stay quiet in the United Nations so nobody knows that it's their control mechanism. But Bretton Woods demonstrated what the British were all about.
When John Maynard, the demon doesn't want to be exposed.
Absolutely. Bretton Woods and John Maynard Keynes were fighting with Dexter White, and Dexter White was a communist in Bretton Woods, and he's the one who set up our world economic system right now. But the British, even back then, said, oh no, we want to have a world currency where John Maynard Keynes put this forward. It'll be called a banco after the first Babylonian Radhanite supposed Jewish families in Venice who had banks called the Banco family. So he was going to call this unit Banco. We now call it the carbon footprint. So whether you know it or not, you are nothing more than a servant of the United Nations. And soon, go ahead and look at your bills, your electric bills and your gas bills, and you'll see that the carbon footprint is already there and that soon you will be charged. You will be taxed by the British through the United Nations, through the World Health Organization, and through their, agendas that they call it, the Agenda 2030. These green agendas are complete and absolute insanity. No one in their right mind could believe anything the United Nations ever said because they've never done anything good, ever, never. And please prove me wrong. Tell me something that the United Nations, whether it's the UNESCO, no. UNESCO is for basically causing sterilization across the world. That's what the World Health Organization was doing in Africa and experimenting. They were giving out the polio vaccine when polio was already gone. Now there's 500,000 children have died in India based upon Bill Gates and the World Health Organization's polio vaccine, but they don't call it polio. They call it infantile paralysis, so it's not the same. This is Pirbright, which is a Rothschild, created all of this. They have the patents, and through Kinetic and through Muriel Animal Hospital.
You're talking about Baron Henry de Worms, who was a maternal Rothschild.
Yep. So Pirbright is the one fueling age-old attempt to wipe out what the British would call indigent populations. In other words, anyone who isn't in 100% agreement with the monarchy and the Pilgrim Society. And remember, when I say monarchy, I'm not saying that the monarchy is British. I'm saying they're corporatists. I'm saying that Charles is the head of the Club of the Isles, which is a secret group. He has more money than anyone else on the face of the earth. And he said it one day by accident that he has trillions of dollars to create a military attack against climate change. Well, there is no climate change. Climate changes all the time. And it's kind of like saying the ozone hole is going to cause ultraviolet to come in. No, that was a lie. When they said that we're going to go into a new ice age, that was a lie. Now they're saying we're going to melt down and all the oceans are going to rise. That's a lie. All of those are political propaganda for economic gain for the British corporatists, the Pilgrim Society. And we love to use the Pilgrim Society name because it truly is exactly that, and that no one seems to notice. They don't even exist as far as people are concerned.
The pilgrims that they're talking about, and this is their great little trick, they actually discuss it in some of their documents, in that they chose the name pilgrims, but it's not the pilgrims of the Plymouth Brethren type. It is the pilgrims of the Babylonian Radhanites who went to and fro, and this is in their documents, to and fro across the world to exchange goods and services and money with the world. So they're sniggering, as they say, Pilgrim Society, because they know that has fooled Americans.
Americans are pretty easy to fool because it was told by the communists how to fool us. Give us the panaceas we want: drugs, alcohol, smoking, entertainment, and sports, and sex. And we'll be so busy, we won't even notice what the politicians are saying because we don't care. Most people know it's fake anyway, so they just don't care. Unfortunately, then America has never, ever been in control of itself. The banks have controlled us. The British have controlled us. And unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that people believe that their last right, which is voting, is their sacred duty. No, it doesn't matter what you vote. You must be kidding, right? That's like saying that Candace Owens, whose father-in-law is Michael Farmer, one of the biggest gold mongers in the city of London, would be a good running mate for Trump. And so you can hear them, trying to see how can we please the American public with a Hollywood-produced, Walt Disney presidential candidate. Since Jimmy Carter, we've had nothing but pathetic kabuki theater in the White House, and those people are
Well,
now.
actually, Douglas, as we're seeing, it goes way before that. We're seeing Warren G. Harding was absolutely a pilgrim, and presidents before him. So I'm not sure that we keep going back to maybe Carter and maybe before that, but I think that's part of the deception. As long as we keep it current, we're never going to get to the core issue, which is the Pilgrim Society.
Yeah, the only reason I say Carter is because Mark Malloch Brown created Optech in the late 70s with Carter so that they could put the proper person into Venezuela through a
Venezuela,
fake
right.
election. Those elections now control the world.
Right. For the electronic voting machines, I think you're right. That was the beginnings. And then Carter then authorized the formation of the Senior Executive Service, which is 10,000 employees put at the top of all of our agencies that don't even report to the president.
Get paid more than anybody else. You can't fire them. Andrew McCabe was, and so was the guy at the DOJ whose wife was,
Or
Bruce Orr.
Bruce and Nellie Orr.
Okay, they're massive criminals. Andrew McCabe was charged with 5 felony criminal charges, which should be worse than felony. It should be treason. And he didn't have to answer for any of them. When Christopher Wray came in to take over for Comey got no blame. Comey, who committed at least 27 acts of traitorous, treasonous actions, nothing happened. Why? Because he's SES. You can't fire an SES member. You can't take away their retirement. You can't lower their salary, and you can't tell them what to do because Obama started moving them around. The 56 federal offices, agencies, started to have people in charge of them who have no knowledge whatsoever of what they're in charge of. All they do is what they're told to do. And then every once in a while, every few years, he'd move them around to a different agency. That shows you that they don't do anything. They don't know
Congress
anything.
formed them in 1978 and authorized that they would be put at the top of all these agencies and be paid these executive level and above funds, and that they would not report to the normal accountability system of the executive branch. So they're out there in no man's land. And who do they report to? There's a group of 300 attorneys in the Department of Justice, all justice attorneys, that handle compensation for all 10,000 people. And now we're seeing they collaborate closely with the Crown agents and the Pilgrim Society.
If Gavin Newsom becomes president.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you guys because I keep remembering forgetting to tell you this. Dianne Feinstein was part of the authorization of the Senior Executive Service, and she actually did the prototype in San Francisco for the Senior Executive Service. So here we go, back to the Newsom, San Francisco, Feinstein, Pelosi crowd. So, and San Francisco was where the United Nations was formed out of the activities of the YMCA. And you mentioned something else I wanted to mention. When we think about the British, we have to remember that there was a time when they were very eager to get about 10,000 of their poor out of England. And so they formed the YMCA, they formed the Salvation Army. And one of the big tasks was to get all of the useless eaters out of the cities and especially out of London. And they identified it as about 10% of the people. And so they're not nice people at this German level of the British.
London has been the think tank or the incubation center for all of the political isms practically that exist, certainly all the evil ones. Fascism, socialism, the welfare state,
Bolshevism,
the Bolshevism, Leninism, Chinese communism through Mao Zedong, communism. Did I say socialism, fascism? Okay, we are slipping into the same exact pattern that Britain was taken over by corporatists. Yep. So that they have, they have their excuses of philanthropy, their excuses of the social welfare state. They have Fabianism. They have all these different things that are supposedly helping the common people. No, they don't. When people tell you that the Prince's Trust Prince Charles III's trust does good work, please send me any proof that King Charles has done anything good with any of his groups. He does the opposite
Here's
of
what
what
they
he
do.
says.
Here's what they do on their websites. They call Getty Images, which was funded with Baring and Rothschild money uh, out of San Francisco, and they order the coolest looking pictures of little children, all happy and smiling, and they plaster their websites with that. They just tug at every heartstring they can because they know that it works and it fools people to their real agenda. They hide behind children.
Well, it's like that new movie that's out about child trafficking. That's not going to get anywhere close to the 800,000 people who are trafficked every year out of America. There's not going to be one single reference to that. There will be a reference to some kind of general thing, general malaise of this evil because of the poor children, but it's not going to help the children at all. The number one traffickers of children, that's China. Number two, Britain. Number three, California. And the ones sent out of our country go through Atlanta. The ones who go to to British Columbia, go through California. And by the time they started Southern California, by the time they reached to Northern California, 75% of those people have disappeared. The rest go on up to British Columbia, and we know what happens to them. They are incinerated, they are killed, or they are sold to China. Now, this is well known. When is there going to be a movie about that? So the point is that your work with the miners on Gavin Newsom just shows us that if we want to slide that far down into replicating what Britain has done, giving away their country to invaders, we should elect Gavin Newsom, because Biden's not going to make it. I doubt that Trump will make it. We have already blasted, and the miners have already brought to light the sins and the crimes of all these other people that they have chosen to be the selected ones. But folks, we have to stand up with moral strength. That's what this is about. We have to bring the truth forward no matter what it costs. We have to show people for who they truly are. And then in the end, we also need to understand that Britain created capitalism, American democracy, which there is no such thing, is a British lie. We do not have a capitalistic free market here. We do not have a democracy here. And we don't even have a constitutional republic because our politicians ignore the Constitution. So the point is, Gavin Newsom is as corrupt as could be. And if you vote for him, you might as well vote for the president of Xi Jinping, the president of China, becoming the president of America, because it's the same communism.
I thought you were going to say you might as well vote for a ham sandwich.
Ham sandwich would be much better. Remember when the Yippies ran a pig? Yeah. I voted for the pig.
There you go.
So thank you so much for your good work. And again, busting another person who is going to attempt to slip into a British chosen selection for an American election where we think that it's our sacred duty to go vote. There's no need to vote, folks, until it's all done with paper, and then you can count the paper ballots. Until then, it is a British selection process.